and let's get started. So let me give Renee an introduction. Professor Renee Bittoun is an internationally recognised expert in smoking cessation, and she's worked in this field for more than 40 years and actually started one of the world's first smokers clinics in Sydney in 1979 at St Vincent's Hospital. Renee is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Smoking Cessation, which is published by the Cambridge University Press, and she's published widely on nicotine addiction and its treatment. She's also the author of several books on smoking and quitting, both for the public and as textbooks for practitioners. As a world-renowned expert and someone who can speak numerous languages fluently, I found out, Renee has spent time teaching in all sorts of places around the globe, including Vietnam, the Pacific Islands, the Netherlands, and Paris, which is one of her very favourite places in the world. I know from experience that you're going to find Renee's presentation on vaping tonight both stimulating, evidence-based, enlightening, and practical. So Renee, it is a privilege to be your colleague. It's fantastic that you're a member of the research team at the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Centre at Avondale, and we really look forward to what you're going to share with us tonight. So thank you for sharing.
All right, thank you so very much, Mel, for giving me that lovely introduction, which I have to now live up to. Just before I share my screen, a competition for those who've just logged on. What is this green illegal crop behind me? I'll put you on the spot. Joshua, just to keep you, or Zelda, it's an illegal crop. What is it? And I'm going to share my screen.
Tobacco.
Correct. It's tobacco. And so what's interesting about that is that it is illegal, and most people don't know that, do they? And you knew that, Zelda. How did you know that?
I've seen it before. My grandfather used to have a plant in his backyard. So, and also because I was a part of one of your sessions a while ago.
Oh, that's I think that's called cheating. If you we didn't want everybody else who knew this. Okay, well, Zelda, I was going to give you a gold star, but I think it will have to be a bronze. Sorry. Anyway,
all right.
That's all right. Just for those who don't know this, so we don't grow tobacco in Australia anymore and haven't been allowed to do that since the year 2006. It's illegal. So you cannot have your own pot of tobacco. You can't grow it, and they found a crop in Bondi. I just thought I'd tell you that, Kevin, just so you, for interest's sake. And why I'm talking about it is because it's from this plant, nicotine is extracted. So keep in mind, nicotine comes from the plant. It doesn't come from the laboratory. That's how it's extracted from the tobacco plant. And that becomes very relevant when I'm talking about nicotine use, vaping, smoking, whatever I'm always talking about. Keep that in mind. This is where this product comes from. This is a little bit about my bona fides, and I want to remind you that I have a few positions, and one of them is that on the working committee of the electronic cigarette for the NHMRC, and I'll talk about that too a little bit later on, and the controversies around that. What's impressive and important for you, I think, to know are, for example, the word vaping itself. The word vape has come from the tobacco industry. They've sort of constructed this so that it gets away from the word cigarette or electronic cigarette, because cigarettes today have had such a bad press. The connotations are unhealthy and unwellness. So to get away from that, and because it is in a vaporized format, the tobacco industries and their marketing wisdoms decided to put this together and use that terminology and call it vaping. So you will see that is taken off. It's the current language for electronic cigarettes. The words are interchangeable, But I just thought I'd tell you that's been a construction of the tobacco industry to get away from the word cigarette. I also wanted to say to you that I have no conflicts of interest, and this is a very important thing to say, because sometimes you do hear presentations that where there are conflicting interests. I don't take any funds from the pharmaceutical companies or any of them who manufacture anything to do with smoking cessation products. I don't take their hospitality or travel. I also evidently don't get any money from the tobacco industry. I wouldn't take it. They don't offer it. Well, sometimes they do, but I don't have it, and I'm not on any of their boards. And it's an important aspect of this as well, that I'm not on any of their subsidiaries. For those who don't know that, we in Australia have signed a treaty through the UN and the WHO that obliges us, in fact, to not have anything to do with tobacco companies or their subsidiaries, which is an important thing to remember in health, which is why, for example, we do not grow tobacco in Australia anymore. It's part of the treaty we signed, and part of the treaty is to not engage with the tobacco industry or the vaping industry, for that matter. So a little bit about the history of electronic cigarettes or vaping. So I'll use those words interchangeably. In about 2003, a Chinese pharmacist who developed this for his mother. There were attempts to make nicotine easily absorbable through various mechanisms prior to this, but he really developed this for his mother, who had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, which is invariably a disease 99% of the time related to smoking, chronically unwell woman. And he said, if I get mum to use nicotine but in a safer way, maybe she won't smoke anymore and she won't get any of those particles in her lungs, none of the smoke, none of the gases. So he was able to find a way in a battery operated form of delivering nicotine in such a fine, not a mist, but to vaporize it so that you could inhale it and it went into your lungs and got down deep into the lungs, right down into the alveolar space. Now, for some who don't know the anatomy of the lungs, the alveolar space is really the end of the, let's just say, picture a bunch of grapes. It's right at the end of the grapes, right at the lining of the grape. That's where the nicotine diffuses across through the lungs into what is the arterial blood of your lungs, not venous blood. Now, why does it matter? Through arterial blood, you are able to achieve a dose that is high and quickly transferred into your arterial blood, and it bypasses the venous system. Now, the venous system is intravenous, if you think of it like that. Your lung blood goes to the left side of your heart and then straight to your brain. It bypasses the right side of your heart, which is exceptionally effective if you want to deliver a drug through the lungs. It is quicker, we now know, to deliver nicotine that way than it is to even inject it. So people imagine, what about an injection of nicotine? Just for you to know, you can't eat nicotine. You can't absorb it through your stomach. You've probably heard of chewing tobacco. That's oral absorption through your mouth, through the oral mucosa. You can put nicotine up your nose, in your mouth, in your ear, but not in your stomach. So we don't eat tobacco, we chew it because it's not absorbed through the stomach. So you can't get it that way. You can't have it. We don't have a nicotine tablet you could take. So through the lungs, incredibly efficient and incredibly high doses. So in the beginning, they had to sort of look like a cigarette. You can see a picture of the one, and I've got one like that myself right here. It looks like a cigarette. In the beginning, that's sort of what it had to look like. This is plastic, in case you're wondering. It's not a real one. And nowadays they don't look anything like it. And I'm going to show you what they do look like, because then been every time you turn around a more refined, a better way of delivering it. And I'm saying better because, and it is better because it efficiently delivers nicotine right into the depths of the lung, which even cigarette smoke doesn't do, which is ironic but true. So a little bit of what they look like if you haven't seen them before. And I'm not sure how many of you have actually seen vapes around. They vary hugely. Some of them look like a pipe. Some of them look like this particular thing, and I'm going to show you this in a minute, which is like a cartridge you fill up. But mostly today, in particular, our adolescent groups are using these things that look like what's called a pod right at the end. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So they vary in size and shape, content, and efficiency. Currently, they're very efficient. This is what one of my patients gave me to show to people how they make up their own solutions. They buy this online. Up until the 1st of October, you could do this. You could buy yourself a pre-mix base. No, it's about 1 litre. You could buy online legally nicotine, 100 milligrams of nicotine in a 20 ml bottle. You bought that. And then this is my patient who does this now. She's a lady with schizophrenia who does it. She's quite stable, but she takes a syringe. She takes some of this. You can all see my arrow, I hope. You take some of this and you take some of that and you do a bit of a mix and you inject it into your vaping machine and you smoke it, basically. Now that has become very disquieting for a lot of people. The fact that you could do this mix up basically at home in your own, this is obviously in an office, but she does it on the kitchen table. So people were worried about 100 milligrams, which is an enormous amount of nicotine, lethal amount. Nicotine is a poison under the Poisons Act. A lethal amount. You could just buy that over the internet. People were very worried about this, hence there's new changes of regulations and legislation. But I just want to point out the doses are phenomenal, and you can still do it as long as you have a prescription to do that nowadays, which is really quite extraordinary. This is what normally a younger version of these vapes look like for some of our students and adolescents who vape. Now, you can see the size of it. And the important thing about this is it's a modern version of a vape. And you'll notice it does not have a single word, and it doesn't, not on the other side either, have a single word about what is in it, except it says bubblegum ice, XXL. And I'm going to come back to this particular vape later. But the important thing is adolescents buy this, and there's nothing about how much nicotine is in it at all, not on any of it, not printed on any of it. So this is a bit of a concern. It says vape with a bang, you can see that, and it certainly does. And from just for your information, XXL means there's a lot of nicotine in it, not a little bit. So the basics about electronic cigarettes is this. You're getting the physical sensation of inhaling nicotine. We rarely see nicotine-free electronic cigarettes. People talk about it, only flavored. Look, we rarely see them. They're sort of in an ultrasonic type of vaporized, and that's how this mechanism works today. There's propylene glycol or vegetable-based solutions, and I've even seen them advertised as, natural vegetable, organic vegetable-based liquid. Organic. You're not supposed to put anything of this onto the lining of your lung. If there are solutions that have flavorings in them. These flavorings are meant to be ingested, not inhaled. And that's the dilemma we have with the medical problems concerning these things. As I said earlier, the vaping technology has become very much more sophisticated than in the beginning, and they deliver a very good, swift shot of nicotine into the deep depths of the lungs and into your arterial blood. Why does that matter, that shot? It makes it very addictive. We're going to talk about nicotine in a moment, but it makes it a very addictive way of delivering nicotine. I'll talk about those other nicotine products that you might know about, like patches and gums, how slow and low they are. You don't get addicted to them because of that. It's the shot that does it, which is terribly unfortunate and makes this mechanism very addictive. Just if you've heard of the terms free-base nicotine, nicotine salts, this is just a little bit about how the changes in how you get nicotine, and there are different ways of doing this. If you alkaline nicotine, make it more alkaline, it is easier to absorb. Historically, for those who don't know this, there has always been a nicotine plant. In fact, there's about 25, I understand, 25 naturally nicotine containing plants in Australia. This is a native plant that grows high concentrations of nicotine that were used by our Indigenous populations in Australia way before Europeans ever came here and smoked. This was not smoked, this was chewed. And it was, it's a great and interesting history, but I don't have time to talk about it tonight. But just to let you know, they would alkaline it too with ash from a fire to make it more absorbable because you chewed it. It was a chewing type tobacco. So a little bit about vaping or e-cigarettes. As I said, it's very efficient. There's high what's called bioavailability. And just like smoking, unfortunately, people titrate, that's the word for it, they titrate the amount of nicotine they get. For those who don't know this or haven't seen this before, this is what's called the topography of smoking or vaping. Here's my fake cigarette again. Hope you know what, it is a fake. And if I have a strong cigarette, I might puff it out into the air, and most of it goes into the air. If it's too weak for me, I'll drag harder and hold my breath, or I might smoke more of it. This is called the topography of your smoking, and we know vapors do that too. So people get very interested and concerned about how much their puffs people are doing per day, or whatever else they're talking about. Keep in mind, you can adjust the amount of nicotine to the nanogram, not milligram, nanogram, that's a millionth of a milligram. You can adjust it just by the way you smoke it. And our vapors and smokers, our vapors we know are very accurate at giving themselves just the right amount they like. It's interesting that there is a very common thing that is going on at the moment, and that's called dual use. People are doing a bit of this and a bit of that. When I can't smoke, I vape, like I might vape in an office, or I might vape where people don't like smoking, or in my car where I don't want anybody to know, or at home, they think it's safe. And I'll vape where I can't smoke, and I'll smoke where I can smoke. So people are doing this dual behavior, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Why would you be doing a little bit of dual behavior? We think that carbon monoxide might in itself, that is the gas from combusting this plant behind me, the tobacco plant, combusting it might actually have a neurotransmitter effect, which is a very interesting thing to think about. So maybe they're getting an extra added attraction by burning after all. PAHs are what are called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Again, tonight, I don't have a long time to tell you what they are, but they certainly induce enzymes that affect medications. So some people, doctors might know that a effect from smoking would be on medications such as clozapine, olanzapine, these are antipsychotics, or on warfarin, which is an anticoagulant. So smoking affects medications. Now, we also know that in vape, there's an enzymatic effect with the induction of 1A2. Now, 1A2 and some of these other enzymes affect alcohol, affect nicotine itself, and affect medications. So that's something people need to know about, but often don't know. The other one that's very interesting about vaping and nicotine is that nicotine is of itself a cough suppressant. Nicotine suppresses your cough. People think, oh, smokers cough. Well, they don't. Not for years and into their smoking do they start coughing. And you'd have thought everybody who smokes should be coughing away, coughing every puff of every cigarette they ever have, but they don't. It's actually nicotine that suppresses the cough on the lining of your lungs. And what's interesting is that we understand that the nicotine in vaping also suppresses your cough. Is that a good thing? No, you want to be able to get rid of or expectorate all the chemicals from smoking. And the other thing we now know is, and there is a link between smoking, as you could imagine, and developing COVID, because you cannot get rid of rubbish from your lungs, because the cilia are affected by this, and because your cough reflex is affected, smokers are more likely to develop COVID and go on to have more serious COVID forms, to have hospitalizations, ICU, and unfortunately deaths. And what's interesting about that is that vapors are falling into the same category now. We're now seeing evidence that vaping is unfortunately a risk factor for developing COVID and going on to more significantly serious COVID outcomes. The other interesting part of vaping that doesn't get a lot of press, which I try to speak about to perhaps younger people, is vaping and passive vaping, just like passive smoking. If you can see it, if you can smell it, and young people go, oh, I don't mind being around a vapor because I love the smell of pineapple in the air, or whatever other grape flavored vaping flavoring they're smelling, that means they've also got the nicotine. So they're passively vaping and they don't really understand the consequences of that. So this is a topic we'd like to pursue much more. What's actually in these vapes that you can buy, like that purple one I showed you, if they're advertised, and sometimes they're not, this is what you might see. Now, I want to remind you that 1 milligram of nicotine is fatal, would kill you outright. You don't get 1 milligram. I mentioned earlier, you get these doses in nanograms, not milligrams. And that's an important thing to remember. All our nicotine products, it's never in your blood in a milligram, because if it was, even though it says 1 milligram on your cigarette, most of it is going out into the air. And even if it says it on your nicotine products, most of it is in the garbage bin. You don't absorb nicotine in milligrams, it's in nanograms. But I'd like you to pay attention to the extra high dose and what that concentration is in milligrams per mil, and why that matters. I'm going to show you later on some studies we did with adolescents and their vapes. So whether these are accurate doses, we certainly now know that New South Wales Health and Federal Health has been looking at what are in vapes, and there's a considerable amount of inaccuracy in them. What are nicotine nitrosamines? Nicotine nitrosamines are carcinogenic products that have been found in cartridges of those vapes. The plasma levels of nicotine, for those who are interested to understand, plasma levels of nicotine, remembering I mentioned earlier nanograms per mil, not milligrams. This is about what you might get, and we're seeing much higher doses from experienced users. What's an experienced user? Somebody who's been vaping for a while and goes, this is too weak, I need to hold my breath longer, or this is too strong, I need to puff it out of my mouth. But we consider them to be very high and much higher than they would get from cigarettes, which is interesting and important to remind ourselves of. The advantages of vaping over smoking. And this matters because we have to concede that if you don't burn the leaf, and any leaf that you burn, any green leaf, will produce carbon monoxide. There is no carbon monoxide. We know that. We've measured it in our smokers. I have my own carbon monoxide meter, which I measure out my smokers with to validate self-report and to see how much they're extracting from cigarettes. And we see none from vaping. That's a plus, because carbon monoxide is a gas that combines with hemoglobin to create carboxyhemoglobin, which is a very significant risk factor for increasing your hemoglobin and clotting. So it's a complicated story, but there's a big advantage from not having carbon monoxide. The fact that there's no tar is also a big advantage. That is no messy glug. That's basically how I can tell you what it is. Glug of tar, no messy tar, which is, again, leaf. Any green leaf will go yellow and become messy. And remembering, nicotine is not yellow, it's the tar that does that. And there is no tar because there's no plant that's being burnt. So there's no particulate matter. And one of the major motives for people going on to vaping in the past was it was cheaper. So I can just tell you right now that it's going up. From the 1st of October, there was a requirement now to have a prescription for vaping. And because people stockpiled it and people are running out, and certainly adolescents can't get access to it, not easily at all now, it has quadrupled in price since the 1st of October, which you can imagine would happen. So the changes in pricing have affected the use of this, so I'll explain that later. But there is a potential for a reduction in heart disease, and I'm saying potential because we don't know the long-term effects. Just like cigarettes took 40 years for people to come to that is before, from about the 1920s till about the early 1960s, about 40 years since mass production of cigarettes, mass production in the 1920s, to 40 years later for people to realize the medical consequences, some of the medical consequences of smoking. So very early days in vaping, we don't know what they would be. There's a potential to reduce heart disease, and I'll put a caveat on that in a second, and certainly a potential to reduce lung disease. That may happen. We don't know the long-term effects of flavorings, for example, on the lung. However, we've now already seen disadvantages in the heart because, again, nicotine causes vasoconstriction. This is from your neck down, gives you an adrenaline effect. And so if I, Renee, who doesn't smoke, had a cigarette, me right now, no history of smoking or vaping, and had a vape or a smoke, up would go my blood pressure right here, right now. And that's an important thing to remember. It has this vasoconstriction effect, raises your blood pressure. Now, we've seen the cardiovascular effects of an acute rise of blood pressure like that. 20 millimeters of mercury, just like that. It decays because nicotine wears off, if you didn't know this, after about 40 minutes. So it wears off. And then if I did it again and I get another shot of nicotine into my arterial blood, into my heart, remember, to my brain, but it gives me this vasoconstriction. And that's a cardiovascular effect. The lungs have been affected by some of the vapes that people have been adding chemicals. One of them, you saw me, am I showing you the mix where one of my patients was mixing it up. If you put cannabis in it or anything else you like to think of, you might like to vape with it, which they do. There are these effects of a type of pneumonia called EVALI. And we've now also seen the flavorings, and there are many types of flavorings in these vapes, range, you name it. I've seen hamburger flavorings, all sorts of flavorings are in it, and that's not meant to go on the lining of your lung. And all of these flavorings, unfortunately, individually have deleterious effects on the cells in the lung. One of the worst ones is actually mentholated. People don't realize that even though it makes your breath smell fresh and lovely, the reaction actually is quite complicated on the lining of the lung. So it's not really safe at all. And it actually has a brain effect, which is quite interesting and important. So the mentholated cigarettes, by the way, if you didn't notice this, have become illegal in Australia for some time, and around the world are because of this. But also it engenders, I'm afraid, a higher likelihood of becoming dependent on it, because there's a neurological effect of menthol on the brain, on the neurons that are addicted to nicotine, I'll put it like that. We also know that, of course, the big disadvantages of those shots of nicotine, and remember that it's not nicotine replacement therapy, like patches and the gums that you know about. They're very low dose and they're very slow. We don't see nicotine patch addicts. We see vaping addicts because of the speed of delivery. We also know that there are oral effects. Dentists are now writing articles and papers, and I've got citations at the end of this presentation for you. Dentists are now complaining bitterly about the flavorings on teeth, destroying teeth. So that's interesting, and an aspect perhaps we don't talk too much or a lot about. There was, up until very recently, little to no quality control over these vapes. Like, what's in this that you buy? Who's controlling what's in it? And what's important and interesting to learn is that BAT, which stands for British American Tobacco, is improving their production, because they're remember, tobacco plant behind me, tobacco farmers, especially in the United States in particular, have a phenomenal lobby group, and they're improving on the production of vapes and the contents, so that it's all, there is, according to them, quality control over what is inside the actual vape. Which we don't really trust either very much. So an overview of, does it help? Do e-cigarettes help you quit? Maybe they help you not smoke, but you become a long-term user of this. So we do know that it's transferring from one form of nicotine delivery to another one. Are they used together? It's very commonly done together, and a recent paper just came out over the weekend, so I haven't had time to put it into this presentation, about people going back to cigarettes from vaping. For example, if you can't vape for a little while, they prefer to smoke. And there's a nice paper about that just come out from Stanford University. So for those who don't know this, that our Therapeutic Goods Administration, in its wisdom, have not approved of this as a treatment for smoking cessation. It is not, there is no therapeutic proof. However, they've recommended, strongly recommended, that it is a prescribed medication for smoking cessation. We can talk about the politics of that some other time. Is there potential for harm reduction? There is potential, but we need the evidence. There's substantial cardiovascular effects. And is it a gateway to tobacco smoking? And this is very strongly possible. Now we're looking at kids, adolescents who vaped, who've never smoked. So we've got a very big concern about that. So it's, nicotine's a poison. The legal status, undoubtedly the legal status of all of this was a mess. So again, the laws have changed. It's now required by law for you to have a prescription to vape. If I wanted to vape, I need a prescription from my GP. There is no way a GP is going to write a prescription, we hope, for a child. If I was a never smoker, it'd be very unlikely that I would get a prescription. However, we don't know currently what the state of prescribing is. But nicotine replacement therapies do not require a prescription. So the opinions of all of this worldwide vary hugely. There is, unfortunately, a substantial rift between people in tobacco control. And as Mel introduced me earlier, I've been in this game for decades, and I come from the very first quit campaigns. Some of you might know them. The sponge ad, where I worked out how much tar came out of the lungs when you smoked. And some of you will have known about all the quit campaigns, the wonderfully interesting and effective smoking tobacco control movement we have in this country has brought smoking down hugely. We're very lucky in Australia to have such a low prevalence of smoking. Unfortunately, the group of people in tobacco control around Australia are now split into, around the world, they're split into the pro-vapers and the against vapers. The pro-vapers saying, gosh, there are smokers we need to do something about, and the non-pro-vapers like myself who's saying, no, we cannot engage with the tobacco industry. We shouldn't do this. We've got other ways we can better help, we can help smokers quit. We don't need to resort to this. Or my view is it's a capitulation, and I don't think we need to do this. So it's to the advantage of British American Tobacco and all the other big tobacco companies that they've been able to split an incredibly effective group of people straight down the middle, which is very interesting. And yes, talk about deja vu all over again. So how do you procure vapes today? If I wanted, me, a consumer, if I was a smoker consumer, I might have to go to my doctor who will write a prescription, and that prescription can be taken to a pharmacist. And I just want to add something about this, who are entitled to advertise it in their stores that they have it, vaping products. Unfortunately, pharmacists are today, and we're now the 27th of October, very poorly supported. They have no idea how to dispense vapes. They don't even know where to get them from. So there's been a dilemma with that. Or I can actually go and buy it online. And if I buy it online through personal importation scheme, I have to show cause that I've got a prescription, and we understand that at the border control, customs will validate your prescription, and customs will allow you to import your own personal contents, like that lady I showed you earlier. So quite complicated, not very well designed, and we'll see what happens, because we are 3 weeks into this and it's been fairly chaotic right from the start, I have to say. Unfortunately, for those who are interested, I've talked a little bit about the TGA. They're recommending something like 100 milligrams per mil to prescribe, but haven't been very good at the moment, very poor at giving people, doctors, prescribers and pharmacists recommendations, which has been very distressing. So I've been in the position to quickly write a method paper, which I'm happy to share with you too, a monograph about vaping and how to measure it, how to measure vaping dependence, what we can do with it. I posted that on the Avondale research site if those who are interested. For GPs who may not know this, who are in our audience tonight, GPs are now entitled to get benefits from smoking cessation counselling. This is entirely new, only occurred on the 21st of July. Never backtrack, trying to remind doctors that they should be talking about smoking cessation before they go to vaping with their patients. And I just thought I can give you some details if you're interested later on, but there are item numbers now. This is, for those who don't know, this is entirely new. Doctors were not paid to talk about smoking cessation at all. And now there are item numbers they can be paid, like a short consult and a long consult. This is something myself and my colleagues have been lobbying for years. And the reason why it didn't get any traction at all with our Medicare is because there would be poor uptake by GPs who are not feeling very confident in doing this. And ironically, it's the most likely cause of death of their patients. The most likely cause of death. Smoking kills it, for those who don't know this, 15,000 Australians a year, or 5 million people around the world every year. So it is the classic pandemic. Just a little bit about what Medicare requires. I won't go into this tonight, I don't think, unless somebody wants me to do that. I can backtrack later on, but there's no training about this, and we did put up some information through Avondale about, and I gave some presentations about this for what you need to do, how you can fulfill the requirements. Now, I want to remind everybody, as I'm getting along in our talk, that nicotine isn't benign, and there's this idea that it is. It's not a safe chemical, just because you can just get the nicotine from vaping and that'll all be it. Well, nicotine, unfortunately, certainly in our mental health patients, increases the risk of depression and anxiety. And unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle that smokers get into. It may self-medicate depression and anxiety, but it also causes it. And this is called the stress paradox, because nicotine in itself elicits chemicals in the brain that make you feel less stressed, but exacerbate it because it wears off so quickly. And that's why it's called the stress paradox. So we know that people with depression and anxiety might be much more likely to be smokers, much more likely to be addicted to it, and be recommended vaping, when my view is that we don't need to do this. And there is no evidence to say that their mental health gets any better. If anything else, it gets worse. We know that that, as I said, nicotine or smoking leads to reducing their depression, but unfortunately they are in this cycle and of anxiety, which unfortunately is a side effect. And if they quit smoking, if they quit nicotine, they are so much better. Their mental health is so much better. So I just wanted to say it's a default that I'm not interested in it at all. There are, until I wrote a manuscript or a monograph, no protocols out there, not from much of the TGA, not much from the colleges of physicians, how to assess a smoker, assess a vapor for being addicted to it, and in particular, our particular concern is managing adolescent vaping, which is a growing concern we have seen. So we're saying, should we measure or assess a smoker for vaping, ask them about time to first cigarette, measure their carbon monoxide levels I mentioned earlier, and the cigarettes per day, remembering what they were like when they tried to stop smoking. Did they try other pharmacotherapies first? And what sort of behavioural therapy did you engage in? Because most people don't talk about behavioural therapies, and I will shortly, hopefully, if I have time. Assessing a vapor for cessation. Now, how many people have now approached me? I don't want to engage with a doctor. I don't want a prescription for vaping. So I'm now suggesting, how about asking how soon after you wake up do you have your first vape? Now, time to first vape, if I didn't explain it to those who've never, is like time to first cigarette. Why do we ask that? We ask that because overnight, most of the nicotine in your body is being excreted in your urine, and most people don't know that it's gone. It's gone overnight. And you wake up with a need to do this because effectively, if you like, nicotine's the chemical that oils your brain. And it's the chemical that gets your brain going. And if you've got none in the morning, it's a drive to wake up and do it straight away. So within 5 minutes, within 30 minutes of waking up, these are significant times. Most of our smokers who are addicted to it will do it straight away. It's not as significant. It's not a significant sign if you smoke a lot of them. So remember I said earlier, how you smoke matters more than how many a day you do. How you smoke them, the topography. Do they get symptoms when they try not to do it? Some of our smokers get very agitated. Some of our vapors can't last 2 hours. Nicotine is a very short-acting drug. 2 hours later, it's practically gone from your body. So unfortunately, they are out the door, either vaping or smoking. Where do they go to vape? Is a question you want to ask. Do they do it inside? Do they do it outside? Can we look at cotinine, which is the metabolite of nicotine? We do. And we do. And can we do a dipstick test? And we're working on those very things right now. That's a dipstick test to show you. We can actually, within 5 minutes of dipping this into somebody's urine, we can see a level of nicotine, just so you know, or cotinine in this way, without sending it to a laboratory. Now, a laboratory test like this would cost about $100. This currently costs $5. And for those who are interested in this, we are working on not a urine dipstick test, which is a bit embarrassing for kids to do. Not embarrassing, humiliating. They wouldn't do it anyway. Even young people don't like to do it. This one here is a bit like a pregnancy test. Oh gosh, I don't want to do this. But it helps me to see what levels of nicotine you're getting from your vapes. But we're now looking at a new product which is coming to us soon, which is going to be an oral salivary cotinine, or nicotine, it's its byproduct, which is in your saliva if you've been vaping or smoking for the last 36 hours. So it's 36 hours, it's still there in your saliva, and we're importing a oral swab, bit like, nothing like the COVID test, just like an oral DNA test. You put it in your own mouth, you swab around your mouth, and up will come a level of nicotine or cotinine in your saliva, and it's yours. You can throw it away. So it's not a DNA test. It's just how much is there in your saliva, which is a wonderful thing for us to be able to use in our future testing and studies. I'm hoping, because if we in the era of COVID, if I did that and you were my clinician, I can actually show you I'm doing it, and here you can read it for me, or if I'm the clinician, Renee, what's my level? And I, as a clinician, can read the level, which is brilliant. Saves me you having to go and do a urine sample in a little jar, and I can validate that you're actually doing it there on the spot in front of me, which is great. And we're going to use this with young vapors. So some of the strategies is vaping cessation, like smoking cessation. That's hard to know. Are we going to be able to do the same things with going to vape, making everybody or suggesting everybody vape outside? Do you wean off the content? Are they going to compensatory vape, like they compensatory smoke? Do we give them nicotine replacement therapies of all the types that are there, and all the other pharmacotherapies that we've got? And this is probably what we are doing. Do we diarise the usage, which we've done? Ask them about the time between. How often do they do this? It's not like having a cigarette. There are differences. The flavourings are very strong, so they love the flavourings. I don't think the flavourings in themselves, I don't believe, are addictive, but it does enhance the effect, which you don't actually get with smoking a cigarette. And what might be the reasons for not doing either one of these is interesting. So people don't want to be influenced by the industry. Once they know British American Tobacco, the tobacco companies are involved, they start thinking, no, I don't think I want to do this. It doesn't occur to people, and it should be better known, that this is where nicotine comes from. It comes from the plant, and who's growing the plant? But all the big tobacco companies. Of course they are. So they have a vested interest in, obviously, the tobacco companies, in making them look sleek, attractive, flavoured, and certainly adolescents don't like this idea of being targeted. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do for vapers, give them nicotine replacement therapy. These are our standard activities, if you like, for nicotine withdrawals, things like short exercises. Glucose is a long story to explain to you why it matters, but smokers are effectively hypoglycemic. And we suggest jelly beans, which sounds, no, can't be true, but it is. And there have been studies to show that that helps. And there are citations at the bottom of my talk about that. Obviously, diversional activities, things about reducing, not eliminating, but reducing caffeine, reducing or eliminating alcohol, certainly for the first 2 weeks. Some of these things really help. Quit lines help. Smartphone apps help. And in the long term, of course, we want to see a smoke-free or vape-free home, putting up signs say don't smoke here zones. Maybe we should put up no vaping here zones in the house or in venues that we know about, university campuses. We're also seeing, and I'll show you that in a moment, schools having a considerable problem with this, and we're suggesting that schools put up, especially around the toilets, to put vape detectors, because there are such things and they are deterrents. I'm not suggesting you put that on in your home, but I'm just suggesting that put up signs, just like we had about smoking, we have about vaping now too. Helping people think about why they don't want to do this anymore, and it's becoming increasingly more and more costly to do this. It's not going to be as cheap as chips as it was before. It was a huge incentive to vape was the cost. Now it's not going to be that at all. We'll see about buddying up. We'll see about speaking to doctors. I'm going to cut this a little bit short because I do want to talk to you about adolescents, because this has been something I've been talking about a lot in the last little while, and it's a big concern for everybody about young people taking up vaping who've never smoked. We certainly know that nicotine has a significant impact on adolescent and young brain development. So this is the effect of nicotine on the developing brain. We're working significantly on what we can do to make that better known in the community. The risk of smoking in never smokers, going on to becoming smokers or going on to becoming long-term vapers is very high. And what's interesting and concerning is that some of our colleagues say, oh, these kids will have gone on to become smokers anyway. They're risk takers. They come from communities where everybody's doing it. they come from families where everybody's doing it. This is absolutely not correct, and that is not true, and we don't have any evidence for that. As I mentioned earlier, we've had in the past very successful smoking cessation, tobacco control movement, and our adolescents have not been taking up smoking. We've got some of the lowest adolescent rates of smoking in the world. So this isn't because kids were going to become smokers. They were targeted by vapors, in a variety of ways. We do know that there are adolescents who are more susceptible to becoming nicotine dependent, and I'll tell you about susceptibility in a minute. We do know that nicotine, because it's such an addictive drug, it's considered to be the most addictive drug known to humans, more addictive than any other drug you've ever heard of. Don't just ask the users, it's always the last drug that's ever given up in a drug and alcohol service. But it's a very addictive drug, and we know, and we have good evidence to show that kids get hooked from the very first exposure, not a few weeks of doing this, not a few days of doing it, but from day one. They get withdrawals straight away. They get a high, a big, strong effect from it, which then wears off. So I'm going to talk about susceptibility in a second, but what's really dreadful is we see them getting withdrawals. These are young users. I learned today that a year two primary school child was expelled from school for vaping, not on probation, but expelled for vaping. This would be therefore a 8 or 9 year old, which is very concerning, very young. Now, these are not kids at schools that are, let's just say socioeconomically lower groups. This is not true. And I won't tell you where from, but we see it in all groups of kids. It seems to develop faster in girls. Of course, I'm not in favour of saying these children should be expelled. We need to be able to manage them better and help them better and be aware of what's going on and understand their dependence. And remember, they don't have to be doing it every day to become addicted to it. So this is a bit more about the developing brain. We know that unfortunately children exposed to nicotine, this is from pregnancy onwards, have throughout their lives poor academic performance, behavioural disorders, ADHD, aggressive behaviour, future substance abuse, risk of suicide and suicide ideation. That's just some of it, which is very concerning to us now when we see kids so young doing this. Remembering the developing brain, it goes on for some time. That is, the brain isn't properly developed till about the age of 25. I know I'm very pressed for time, so I just wanted to remind you a little bit about adolescence and our adolescence in Australia. Reports of kids using it a lot around, and this is what we actually have data on. What is going on today is probably a lot worse. It is the major, again, I heard today, it has been the major cause of disruption with kids going back to school from last week, kids going back into school. So these are products that have been pitched to the young with their flavouring. These are flavourings that some of you might have seen. This is around about the 1st of October, where this Alex Lyons was selling $10 vapes per vape, one of those things that doesn't have any indication on any of this as to how much nicotine is in this, which is very distressing. This is a private school. One of my colleagues picked up all these vapes from a private boys' school in North Sydney. And the reason why I'm telling you why that matters, and he's happy for me to talk about it, is that, again, this is not a socio-economic, this is not a group of kids or boys who would have ever smoked. This is what he collected at the beginning of the year before we went into lockdown. And this probably now is going to be much worse. I wanted to point that out. Back to this story. This is a vape that one of our mums took a photo of, whose son had a heart attack at home, and she didn't know he vaped. And he had 2 heart attacks, one at home, and unfortunately he survived. A totally well young 16-year-old had a heart attack by vaping at home. His mum didn't know he was doing it, and they found it on the floor at their home after they came home. He had his second heart attack in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. I'm just telling you how lethal these things can be. We tested our vapes for nicotine that we collected from what's called the tattoo team, where I work in Redfern, looking at tobacco use, and we were able to get some voluntary supplies of vapes from kids. And just, if you can remember back how high these concentrations of nicotine are in the vapes that kids are buying, who have no idea there's nicotine in them. They don't know it. They just say, it says on the packaging, this is what it says: XXL energy drink, apple, peach, grape. And why they vary is because the kids will have used them, and so they've used up some of the nicotine in them, but probably most of them will have had at least 100 milligrams of nicotine in the vapes. And you can imagine that kids get very unwell from this. They do this for a head spin. They do it to get a buzz. They like it because it's a stress release. They use it for weight control, which is correct and true and does do that. They become hooked very quickly, and they're doing it very quickly every day at home alone as soon as they wake up. These are kids doing this. These are under 18-year-olds. From, we don't know how young the youngest would have been doing this now, but we're doing a survey looking at how soon after you wake up do you do this? Do you do it at home alone? The very basic information I have already is to tell you is that 50% of the kids who vape, 50% of the kids who vape every day, and the ones who do it every day are doing it at home alone. So gone are the days where people thought, oh, they're doing it as with their peers. They're not. They're hooked, and that's what hooked people do. They do it alone at home. This is some of the symptoms of withdrawal between puffs. This isn't, I've stopped vaping. This is in adolescents and in adults. They become irritable, angry, can't concentrate, poor concentration in class. This is fairly typical. They wake up to do it quickly. They keep it close by because nobody knows they're doing it, and they can sort of surreptitiously have it in their pocket. It certainly doesn't look anything like a packet of cigarettes. They get strong urges and they can't restrain themselves, which is very unfortunate. They get negative effects from it. We've seen overdoses, I mentioned, and we've seen overdoses present to hospitals now. Kids feel sick, they throw up, they can learn. It's really interesting. We don't see overdose in adults, we see overdose in kids, because adults can titrate that nicotine amount. Kids just go for it in a big way and get really unwell from it. And this particular young boy had a heart attack from it. And I just thought what we can do in the community is what might be able to do is we absolutely have to be aware that kids might need help, and not to deny children, expel children because of this, which is very unfortunate. Should we have an outright ban? Will the increase of price reduce use, or will it send the whole vaping story underground? And it might do that. We don't know yet. So I know I'm rushing through my presentation, and that's my last slide. For those who haven't been involved in our course, just to let you know, we do have a course, a postgraduate micro-credential course in nicotine addiction and smoking cessation. And this lecture is part of it. So I'd like to thank you all very much for staying the course tonight, staying through this, and I'd be very grateful or interested to know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. I'll just say we're very used to on Wednesday nights going from 7 till 8:30 with our students, who are most of them are here tonight anyway. So We will hang in there till 8:30 for anyone who would like to stay and ask some questions. But if for any reason you need to go now, we know we've gone a little over the advertised time. You're very, very welcome just to quietly leave as well. So anyone with a question, please feel free to unmute and pipe up.
Yes, please.
While everyone's getting their brave on, Renee, can I ask a question about the kids in terms of, we know we've got a problem with young people. What really is done to help them to get out of that in terms of, are you able to give them NRT patches, or how do you help children?
Well, that's right. And how young are the children who have got problems? We know that, as I said, I heard today of an expulsion of a child who was in year 2, which makes them 8. Do we give them NRT? We can legally do that with parental consent, give them pharmacotherapies for smoking cessation. Those nicotine products, not the medications, but the nicotine products, like perhaps the quick acting ones, perhaps the spray, the oral spray. We just have to have a much better understanding and be much more sympathetic to the idea that kids have withdrawals, which they do. There's this idea or notion that they don't. So being aware, and yeah, it's going to require medications, I think, for some. And we have to ask the parents, talk to the children, how are they feeling? What is their mood like? What effects did they get from vaping? They might tell you, it calmed my nerves, which is what they do. It helps me concentrate. And we need to evaluate or assess adolescent vapers, which we don't even have a protocol for, but I've written one. So how do we know what they're doing? So I've been trying to write, as you know, I wrote a monograph for it, to even get the ball rolling along, and hope to collaborate with other people in adolescent medicine to talk with kids about this. It's ironic that children don't know what an addiction is. I mean, adults don't know what an addiction is. I like it, therefore I'm not addicted to it is a common comment, isn't it? That doesn't necessarily mean they're not addicted to it. Just because you like it, of course. I mean, you might like it or you might hate it, but if I like it, I can't be addicted to it. Or I do it because I'm stressed. It helps me relax. I'm not addicted to it. So we get a lot of this sort of commentary, and we need to be able to better assess what they mean by that and tease out how dependent they are. And then again, in adolescence, where is the range here? What is the age group here? We certainly know young adults, we can give a lot more intensive pharmacotherapies to get them off it. We can do that.
Some adults say they enjoy it.
Yeah, well, they enjoy it. Does that mean it's not addictive because they enjoy it?
It's a nice thing. I like it. I mean, enjoy it.
Yeah, they enjoy it, but that doesn't mean that it's not addictive. Many addicts love their drug, enjoy their drug. Enjoying doesn't exclude. It's not exclusive that because you enjoy it, you're not addicted to it. In fact, if anything, it enhances the addiction. I like it. It gives me relief. I like it. I love it. I enjoy it.
I suppose many people do not understand what addiction is.
No, they do not. And sometimes you have to be fairly brutal about pointing it out. One of my colleagues said to a vapor, what is your end game here? What are you going to do in the end? Are you going to do this all your life? This is an all your life thing. This isn't a choice. This is going to be every day. You have to access this product every single day for the rest of your life. Is that what you want to do? That's what you're going to do, because that's what smokers do. It's all of your life. It's not a transient thing. This is a permanent thing you're going to have to do. So if you enjoy it and you have to pay for it, are you addicted? What is an addiction? What happens when you can't get it? If you can't buy it, what happens to you? It's really important to tease out these differences between needing to, choosing to. I'm choosing to smoke. I need to smoke. I enjoy it. Tease this all out for them, because it's very important for them to grasp just how addicted they are to this. And what happens when they don't do it? How long can you go without? What's the longest time you've ever not done this? Can you go a whole day? Can you go a week? How long can you go? Can't go
Renee,
very long. Sorry.
sorry.
You know,
I was just jumping in. I've got a couple of questions in the chat. Someone has asked, is secondhand vape from vaping dangerous?
well, we're looking at that right now, and there is good evidence to say that you inhale somebody else's smoke and the vape flavorings, and it looks like it's dangerous. It's, of course, like smoking. It depends on the size of the room you're in. If somebody's secondhand vaping in a car, that's a confined space. You're going to be breathing in as much as they are breathing in. You're going to be getting, if you, these smallest confined spaces, you're going to be getting as much nicotine and flavorings as they are getting. So yes, it is dangerous. Until proven otherwise, which I don't believe it will be, it's starting to look like inhaling other people's vape is like inhaling other people's smoke.
What about statistics for vaping in other Pacific countries, for example? Are you aware of any statistics for how vaping's taken off in places like Fiji, the Solomons, Vanuatu, etc.?
No, I don't believe it's anywhere near as high. Nowhere near as high. It really is the more affluent countries that have been targeted for sales of these things. Southeast Asia, increasingly now more, but not the Pacific Islands. And if they can, if I was working in the Pacific, which I am, I would say we would, before it gets out of hand, ban it outright. Ban it outright. Don't have it, access to it in any way at all. We didn't ban it in Australia, and this is much to everybody's huge regret. Huge regret. We have now these kids doing this with these products. I'm sorry, am I still sharing with you? I'll stop sharing. We should have banned it straight away, outright. Ban it. There are countries that have banned it, and there are countries that have been under enormous pressure by tobacco companies, really, particularly in the United States, where it's got completely out of control, totally out of control. In the UK, they're now regretting not banning it.
Interestingly, in New Zealand, Renee, you can buy it at the corner store very easily from what I've heard from presentations there. You
can, which we don't want here at all. Again, the pressure to do that has been interesting and a big concern. Who recommended that and where that comes from?
Renee, I'm curious about the relationship between nicotine, adolescence, and academic performance and ADHD, just given nicotine and its effects on concentration and cognitive performance. How much can you elaborate on that relationship?
Well, how do we know, how much do we know what's happening? Why is nicotine so deleterious to academic performance? I don't think we know the mechanisms very well, but we hope to learn soon. We're putting together a sort of a study group looking at that. I'm putting this together to look at why, because the evidence is there, but the mechanism is not. There are some that are suggesting that upregulating these nicotine acetylcholine receptors in the brains of right from the embryonic stage right through to the the neonate, to the young child, to the adolescent. These this upregulation of receptors has done something to neuro adaptation to nicotine. That there's a possibility there's a neuro so that nicotine becomes critical to function, which is pretty awful to learn. It's not, from my understanding, it's not due to hypoxia. People thought about hypoxia in pregnancy affects babies' mental health, sort of neuronal development, and whether it was hypoxia from smoking or carbon monoxide, right, causing hypoxia. And it doesn't seem to, it is a nicotine effect. But watch this space and I'll come back to you possibly this time next year and give you some more information about there are some neurobiologists who are certainly working on this. In particular, we hope to have speaking for us a neurobiologist from Holland called Mansfelder, who Hugo Mansfelder, who is a neurobiologist who is absolutely on top of this brain cell changes in the neurons of the neonate and around the developing brain. This is not just animal models, this is in humans as well. So hopefully we can get you all back for a talk. Won't that be cool? I think that would be great to have people giving talks on that very subject, because again, there's this notion that nicotine's benign and it's not. But we have the evidence that, you know, that kids exposed to nicotine, and we've been able to test their nicotine levels in cotinine. So the papers are there, but what's the mechanism is, I'd like to be able to tell you, but I don't know.
Thanks a lot, Prof, for the wonderful presentation. I'm just wondering if you will be kind to make these PowerPoint slides available.
They're absolutely yours as part of the course, Isaac.
It's one of the most loaded sessions that we have had, I think, on the session.
There's a lot of information here, and there's more. I could speak for a long time about what can be done, and well, you'll hear more from me on this subject, because once you're a student in our course, we don't let you go, do we, Mel?
So the vaping monograph that Renee mentioned too, Isaac, I actually put the link to that in the chat earlier on.
Yeah, I've copied it. Once you stop this Zoom, the link will disappear. I've copied it down. Okay. Thank you.
No worries, but the slides for this will be available to current students as of tomorrow, so you will be able to access them.
Another question for Renee. Will you mind speaking to a group here on Zoom sometime when you get time?
You'd like me to speak on your group?
On this subject, this subject.
More of this.
Yeah.
You like this topic, do you?
No, I think a lot of people around here, especially where I work, might appreciate. I'm going to talk to them tomorrow.
I'm happy to do that, Isaac. I'm happy to do that. I could do this very same presentation for your group. I have done this a lot. I did it today for Westmead Hospital and their teams. I do it a lot because people have no information. They do get some information from government webinars, but they're not as, how do I put it, independent.
Pointed. They're not as pointed as this.
I'm afraid not. So I'm happy, Isaac, if you would like me to do this, we can tee up a time and I can give a talk to your team. For sure.
That is fine. Thank you very much.
Happy to do that.
I'll go and do a bit of inquiry and talking and seeing the interest and whatnot. Thank you.
Happy to do that.
Renee, hi, great presentation. Leah here. I'm just wondering, are you aware of any programs or education teaching that's available for schools or is actually currently happening within schools, public or private?
Is nothing. The New South Wales Health Department has been extremely slow on this, as has the Education Department, extraordinarily slow. And it's not for wanting, and not for me going and begging and crying and the various things that you do trying to influence the Department of Health, especially when we saw some serious effects on kids. There are some seriously horrible effects. These are unfortunately, fatalities waiting to happen. Sounds like an exaggeration, but it isn't. And I have spoken to the health department about it. I don't work for New South Wales Health, so I can be fairly critical, and I am. I have retired from my clinical work with them, so I don't work with them anymore, which is good because it gives me a particular opportunity to say what I think, and you don't want to hear what I think, because pretty critical on this. Of course we understand that COVID has overwhelmed everybody, but it's not for lack of information that we have and concerns that we have. We could have at least had some media, some sort of campaigns on the media, information for parents, information for students. There's nothing. And there's still nothing.
I just wanted to mention too, in case Leah and a few others here hadn't known, that Renee did a presentation specifically for teachers and parents back a month or so ago, and there's a link to that available on the Avondale Australia YouTube site. So if you go to Avondale Australia on YouTube, you'll see a channel there for the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Centre. And so if you've got any friends that are parents or teachers that might want to know some information, they can actually go and view that recording. So it'd be just a matter of going to the Avondale YouTube site and finding that recording, and you can send them a link.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good night, everybody. I think, have we done Mel? Or we?
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along. I think we're down to generally our students now, and I just wanted to remind our current students in this nicotine addiction course that next week you're up. So we have our case study presentations next Wednesday night. But everyone else, thank you so much for coming along, and thank you, Renee, again for another really interesting presentation. So I'll stop recording. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for coming along, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.